Good morning. It's cold out. I'm drinking coffee. Let's talk about AI. I am going to keep this as brief as I can, which is going to be a challenge, but I'm going to also break this up into 3 sections. What is AI? Where are we with it? And what's up with the ethics? Let's start with what is AI? And I don't mean like it's artificial intelligence, but like what is it doing? You have probably heard of the term neural network, and that's the thing that's driving most AI that's happening right now. A neural network at its most basic is essentially just a program that takes in a ton of training data and some information about what it should do with that training data, and then tries to produce output that makes the humans happy. Here is essentially what it looks like from the computer's perspective. Let's say you are the neural network. I hand you a slip of paper. That paper has a number on it. You first receive the number 263, and I tell you this is a good number. Then I give you the number 347. I tell you this is a bad number. Then I give you the number 126, and I say, this is a good number. After a while, you notice that all of the good numbers seem to have a 2 in them, and all the bad numbers lack a 2. And so you start to say, okay, if you give me a number and I see a 2 in it, it's probably a good number. You are now artificially intelligent. Disclaimer, that is a massive simplification. So alright, we have to throw a ton of data at a computer and tell it what to do with that data, and then it gives us some kind of a result. Why is that helpful? This is made muddier by the fact that most computer operations are input-output. I give you some input, you give me some expected output. It either passes or fails. But with AI, I give you input and you give me a best guess at what might be some output. But this is actually a huge boon. We don't know how to solve certain problems, and it's a lot easier to take the data around a problem and feed it to a computer and tell the computer what you want it to kind of do, and then let the computer do the hard work. We can do some amazing stuff with this. Think about like medicine. If we have a bunch of information about patients who eventually develop some disorder, we can take that information about patients, feed it into an AI that can identify said disorder, and give us an early alarm bell that we should at least keep an eye on that person for that disorder. Especially if we don't know how to identify it, but we do know we have a ton of data around it. If a human doesn't know how to do something, we can't tell a computer how to do it. But if we know what the inputs and outputs are, a computer can possibly emulate it. Emulate it. That's a key word. Emulate it. But going back to the whole giving a computer an input and expecting an output thing, right now, whenever you use a computer, you are giving it commands. You're saying, do this thing. And the computer either does the thing or it breaks. Even if you're just on your phone and you tap on an app icon, that's a command. The command is open this app. The app will either open or crash. There's no AI involved. But with AI, it's changing from a command to a request. You're saying, hey, can you try to do this thing? And the computer says, I'll try, maybe. And instead of an output or error, you get a shrug sometimes. So that's AI in a nutshell, but where are we with it? AI can and will completely change the way that we interact with computers. Not always for the better, but sometimes. And when I say computers, I don't mean computers as we think of them today. I'm not talking about AI overhauling the way that we interact with a computer that has a keyboard, a mouse, and a monitor. I'm talking about the way that humans interact with devices in general, at an abstract level. Net new human-computer interfaces that have yet to be created will start to become possible. And I'm not even talking about like brain chip implants or anything. I'm talking about things that you can do today. Like think about the Echo, right? Amazon's Alexa system or the Google Home or anything like that. You're just barking commands at a box, right? That's sort of a new type of input, but in reality, you're still just giving a command to a machine. And I would love to tell you what the shape of this will look like, but the point is that we haven't figured it out yet. Said another way, think about smartphones. Think about the iPhone. Think about how it changed the landscape of personal computing. AI will at some point have its iPhone. And I'm not saying it's going to have a device that goes in your pocket that uses AI. I'm saying something is going to come out that fundamentally changes the way that we interact and think about computing. That's cool, that's exciting, and it's going to build on top of a lot of the technology that has been coming to fruition recently between increasingly powerful phones in our pockets and VR headsets that can do room scale mapping with no computer attached. All of that is going to culminate in some way. It's not far-fetched to think about a world where you can just say where you want to be and a VR headset renders a completely generated landscape. But even that is still just giving commands to a computer. I'm still thinking within the box here. But that box is its own problem. And that brings us to our third section. Ethics. Everyone loves being monologued at about ethics. Look, I know the last thing that anyone wants to hear in the face of something exciting and new is, but here's why it's bad though. And frankly, I don't know. I don't define your moral code, so I can't tell you if something's ethical for you or not. But in my opinion, a lot of this is gray. I mentioned I was thinking inside the box. Well, the problem is we don't know where the lines of the box end, and we don't know what is acceptable from a human ethics perspective to really dive into. We have good guesses, and we have really smart people thinking through these problems and spaces. But this is a huge leap. Think about books. Think about written language. We didn't have a way to pass knowledge from generation to generation for a long time besides storytelling. And then we started having written language, and we could document stuff. That is a fundamentally anthropological phase shift level change in humanity. And I would argue that among a bunch of other major inventions, a very notable one recently is the internet. And while a bunch of people who are mostly criminals will try to convince you that Web3 and crypto is that next phase shift, I think it's AI. However, those AIs are built on very seedy foundations. All of the image generation AIs, all of the text generation AIs, even Watson, IBM's thing that did a lot of Jeopardy, it's all based on information that was essentially stolen. Information here could be text or artwork or written word. It can be anything. One could argue that publicly available information on the internet is fair game. And that has some merit to it, but legally and morally, not really. Think about these image AI generators. They need a ton of input in order to create the output in the styles that people want. So if someone wants digital artwork to come out of the image generator, it needs millions of digital artworks going into it. Now, I don't know about you, but I highly doubt that each of those artists that created the artwork that is the input for these machines was paid. And yet, any random person can type some words into a box, and in part, that artwork produces new output. Now, all of this is made worse by the fact that our society centers entirely around money and cruelty, and artists are not paid well to begin with. But given that we live in a capitalist, self-centric society and not a society that advances the entirety of humanity, we have to grapple with this. And this is completely glossing over the fact that inputs are generated by humans, and humans have flaws. So these outputs generated by these AIs emulate, as I said before, all of the flaws of the input. That line of thinking is also very weird, because AIs are largely being driven by tech people. And among tech people are tech bros. And tech bros have some very weird views on humanity. There's a large swath of people in tech who essentially believe that computers are better than humans because computers don't make mistakes or are completely logical. And that's a weird take to begin with, but they strongly believe that and they're moving forward with that assumption. It is why we have situations like self-driving cars where they can choose who to hit between multiple humans, and people are okay with that to some degree, but also notably, a lot of people aren't. But it would not be unheard of to go into a room full of tech people and say, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we could get rid of judges and instead just have an AI interpret the law and determine who's guilty? A non-zero number of them would agree with that sentiment. It's very easy to believe that human irrationality is a flaw, but it's also important to remember that it's what got us here. It's what got us to the point that we're creating these technologies. We're not trying to erase ourselves from existence. We're trying to advance our comfort and ability to explore the universe. I mean, in reality, it would just be nice to have, stable food and healthcare, but that too. I've also completely skipped the fact that policy is deeply lacking here. We don't have policy in place to have any kind of guardrails for all of this. We still barely have the right policy in place for the internet, and that is far older. There is essentially not a reality right now in which we have a strong foundation legally for all of this stuff. So it's just the Wild West right now. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Experimentation and confusion is part of the process, but having some guardrails, especially when it comes to the fact that we're taking very human input and trying to replace human output, it seems like it merits a second look. And that doesn't mean shut it all down. That doesn't mean don't use this stuff. All of it's a gray area. I use it. It's fun, it's interesting, and it helps me out. It's an important tool, and it's going to change the way that we navigate computing in general. But it's also important to retain perspective as to what this is, what it's built on top of, and the future implications. Be an informed user. and make good decisions. I hope you've learned a little bit about artificial intelligence and the place that it has in the world around us. This is a massively interesting space, and this won't be the last time I talk about this. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Endeavorance. Take care and be well.